Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed analysis. Let's cover them as comprehensively as possible by going beyond the newspaper so that you don't have to go back and read the paper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you're looking to enroll for our online classes, this would be the perfect opportunity as Unacademy is offering a flat 50% discount on the subscription. Now you can avail a subscription at just 19,999 along with up to 6 months of free extension. This will barely work out to 833 rupees per month, making it one of the most affordable UPSC coaching in the country. I'm told that this offer will end tonight. So those interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description below. On the subscription page, you might see a different price, but to avail the offer, you have to enter the code IAS English. So with this, let's get started and look at the first topic. On page 1, 8, 10, and 11, we have multiple articles, including an editorial related to the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill that was pushed in the Lok Sabha yesterday. The government has suffered an embarrassing defeat in the parliament. This Constitution Amendment Bill that required a two-third majority, it has not passed as the government was not able to bring together sufficient numbers in the Lok Sabha. If you look at the number of members present and voting when the bill was pushed, 528 members in the Lok Sabha were present, which meant for a two-third majority vote, you needed 352 votes for the Constitution Amendment Bill to pass through. But however, the government could muster just around 298 votes in favor of the bill, with the opposition pulling in around 230 votes, thus leading to the failure of the bill in the Lok Sabha. Now, this comes as a setback for the government and it brings the focus on the topic of women's reservation, delimitation. These are the topics which are in the limelight as a result of the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill. We have been discussing this particular topic over the past few days. So let's quickly get a background quickly and then analyze as to what are the implications because of this development. Now, to provide for 33% reservation for women in state legislative assemblies and as well as in the Lok Sabha, in order to increase the participation of women in politics and to enhance women's representation in our legislatures. In 2023, the historic 106th Constitution Amendment Act was brought out by the Parliament, which paved the way for women's reservation to be provided in legislatures. But for its implementation, there are certain requirements, legal and constitutional requirements. In order to designate the constituencies that are reserved for women candidates, this law provides for delimitation exercise to be carried out based on the next available census data. And as you know, the census exercise has just begun after a long delay. The government said because of the disruption caused by COVID-19 pandemic, the census slated for 2021 could not be conducted. Now finally, the census which was much delayed has started in 2026 and will be completed by next year. But by the time the entire data is available, it would be at least 2029. And there wouldn't be enough time for a new delimitation commission to designate these constituencies for women candidates, which means it may not be implemented even by 2029 Lok Sabha elections. So, going by this trajectory, for implementing women's reservation in legislatures, we might take even almost a decade. Somewhere in 2034 would be when we will see the implementation of women's reservation in Lok Sabha elections. So the government says to avoid this, to provide for immediate implementation, to ensure that in the next cycle of elections, women's reservation can be provided, The government says that this new Constitution Amendment Bill was introduced, the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill. But however, along with this, two other bills were also tabled by the government: a delimitation bill to set up a new delimitation commission, and as well as the Union Territories Amendment Bill to extend the provisions to the Union Territories of Puducherry, Delhi, and Jammu and Kashmir. Now, with the failure of the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill, the government has withdrawn the remaining two bills as well because they can't be seen in isolation. The three bills that were tabled, they're all interconnected and they all depend on the passage of the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill. So, as a result, the delimitation bill that was introduced and the Union Territory Amendment Bill that was introduced, they have both been withdrawn by the government of India. So now let's understand why is this controversy present. See, the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill sought to amend Article 334A so that women's reservation can be implemented immediately after carrying out a delimitation exercise. But delimitation is largely based on census data. But this is where the controversy comes up. If a delimitation is forced upon using, let's say, the last available census data of 2011, or even the new census data, the question is, how would the distribution of seats for states be affected? Because see, delimitation is specifically for redrawing the boundaries of a constituency, which can be done within a particular state without touching the number of seats that a state has in the parliament. That's what India has been doing for the last 50 years. In the past delimitation that was done in the early 2000s, the number of seats allocated to each state was never altered. It has remained frozen since 1970s, since the 42nd Amendment Act. But the internal boundaries that were redrawn of the constituencies within a state, it was done without touching the number of seats allocated to the states. But now what the government of India was proposing through this Constitution Amendment Bill was to amend Article 81 and as well as Article 82 to expand the Lok Sabha, to increase the number of seats in the Lok Sabha and ensure that there is a pro rata allocation of seats following the proportional model of representation for the states, while providing for delimitation to be carried out so that the constituencies within the state can be redrawn to make the constituencies more representative. Because the other argument of the government is that right now you have certain constituencies where one MP is representing a population of 48 lakh people. There are certain constituencies where one MP is representing a population of just 6 lakh people. Look at the stark difference. Because India's population has grown quite exponentially in the last 5 decades. The principle of one person, one vote could get diluted if more constituencies are not created and if more MPs do not represent our vast population. But however, this exercise is not so easy. There are other concerns which are equally important which should be kept in mind. Now, Article 81 of the Indian Constitution, which determines the representation of states and union territories in Lok Sabha, which seeks to be amended through the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill, it proposes that the Lok Sabha would now be expanded from 543 to 850 seats, with 815 seats being provided to the states, retaining the same existing level of percentage that states have, with around 35 seats being provided for union territories. But states with relatively lower population and lower fertility rates, particularly the southern states, even eastern, northeastern states of India, they would be at a disadvantage. Though the government is committed that the percentage of seats would remain the same and they would see a 50% jump, all states would see a 50% jump in the seat allocation. But the problem is, few specific states with larger population, particularly in the Hindi heartland, they would see a significant jump in absolute numbers compared to the small increase that other states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, or Karnataka would see. Though the percentage representation would be the same, in absolute terms, a few states would gain significantly to the disadvantage of the other states. And this brings up the question of federalism, center state relations, and the federal balance, which is essential to be maintained. It's because of this reason that the number of Lok Sabha seats and representation for states in the parliament was frozen based on 1971 census data through the 42nd Constitution Amendment Act in 1976 during the emergency period. Because, see, some states had implemented the family planning programs better, particularly the southern states, whereas few states were seeing an exponential population growth. So, until a time that the country achieves a uniform population rate to ensure fairness and regional equity, this freeze was placed in 1976 that until the first census post 2000, number of seats given to the states in the parliament would not be touched. This was further extended under the Vajpayee government in 2001 through the 84th Constitution Amendment Act, extending this freeze until the census after 2026, which is the current census which has begun. It should have happened in 2021, but it has started now. So, this would be the basis for deciding the distribution of seats for the states in the Lok Sabha. Now, this is a critical issue for any state. Representation in the parliament, right? Of course, it is made on a proportional basis, on the basis of population. But if states have performed well with regard to their economic growth and curbed their population growth in order to achieve the larger national goals, but some states have failed at this, you can't end up rewarding the states that have not been able to achieve the targets and penalize the states which have actually achieved the targets, because that would create a dangerous imbalance which could end up threatening the very now integrity and unity of the nation itself. It would end up creating a stark political and economic divide. So in 2003, through the 87th Amendment Act, it paved the way for the next delimitation to be carried out, but without touching the number of seats that were given to the states. That is within the existing Lok Sabha with 543 seats, that is, you can say 550 seats, without touching the number of seats, the total number of seats in Lok Sabha and the number of seats given to each state, the internal delimitation was carried out. A delimitation commission was constituted, which provided for redrawing of the territorial boundaries of the constituencies to uphold the principle of one person, one vote, so that roughly each constituency has the same population. But however, given the population rise, there is a fundamental problem today because there are constituencies where an MP is representing nearly 4 million people. There are many constituencies where an MP is representing 2 million people. And there are several constituencies where an MP is representing just around 6 lakh people. So this is one of the arguments put forward by the government. And more importantly, a delimitation tagged to the previous census data could provide for immediate implementation of women's reservation. So the government was seeking to achieve these two goals. But this has generated very strong opposition, especially by opposition ruled states and by almost all the opposition parties. That's because it touches upon the sensitive subject of federalism and the delicate balance between states. Now, for example, if you go by the model that was proposed by the central government, even if you account for 50% jump in seats for every state, a state like Kerala would see a jump from 20 to 30 seats. So in percentage terms, its proportional representation would not be touched. Same goes for Karnataka. With 28 seats, it would jump to around 42, maintaining the same proportional representation. Same for Tamil Nadu. In fact, for Tamil Nadu, there would have been a slight increase if this model was implemented based on 2011 census data. But when you compare in absolute terms, look at the number of seats, a state like UP would see a jump from the current 80 seats to 120, adding 40 seats. UP is already a political heavyweight, playing a critical role in national politics. With 120 seats, with that absolute number, though the proportional representation is the same, the percentage is the same. With absolute number of seats in Lok Sabha, some states will get a unfair advantage, as argued by the southern states and even by the eastern and northeastern states. So now, going into the bill itself and the tabling of the bill, wasn't the government aware that it didn't have enough numbers? Obviously, the government would know as to how many numbers it would be able to garner in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. That's pretty easy to estimate. Not only based on the numbers of the ruling party and the ruling coalition, the government would be in touch with some other parties as well, trying to garner support for any such critical bill. Then how did the bill fail? Right? The government would be aware that it doesn't have sufficient numbers. But this is where the political controversy comes up, and the editorial points this out. That was this a deliberate attempt by the government to try and push a delimitation exercise and altering the share of seats assigned to the states, which is a separate controversial issue altogether, under the garb of women's reservation. Because the government would obviously be aware that opposition parties would oppose any such move, and opposition parties could be painted as anti women in their stance, though they are not. Because when the Women's Reservation Act was passed in 2023, there was near unanimous political support in the parliament. Every single party, with complete conviction and certainty, have backed the Women's Reservation Act that led to the constitutional changes in 2023. So, no party per se is opposed to women's reservation, right? But they are opposed to the indirect pushing of delimitation and the attempt to change the share of the states under the guise of women's reservation. Because even without this linkage, even without linking women's reservation with changing the number of seats for the states, women's reservation can still be implemented. How? If the government is really keen on providing for immediate implementation, it can go ahead with the current numbers in the Lok Sabha, take the current seats, and set up a delimitation commission as it was done in early 2000s to reserve seats for women. So there's no need to increase the seats in the Lok Sabha. Yes, there is an argument that our population has grown in the last 5 decades. Our MPs, our constituencies are not truly representative of the population. How can one MP carry out administration of such a large constituency with a population of 4 million, right? Or 2 million? There are many, many such constituencies. That's a valid argument, but a separate argument altogether. Now, women's reservation, if it had to be provided immediately, it can be done in the current Lok Sabha itself, in the current state assemblies itself. But no party would agree to this. That again exposes the hypocrisy of all our political parties, irrespective of which party we are talking about, right? None of them want to provide reservation for women candidates with the existing numbers. Why? Because it might hurt the existing availability of seats for the male candidates. Given that most parties are male dominated, and given the patriarchal mindset of the society in general, there is a hesitance to not provide a reservation for women in the current legislative assemblies. So what are they doing? They're trying to increase the number of seats and then reserve some seats for women. But if these two are interlinked, if delimitation and the share of seats for states is linked with women's reservation, then it raises a much, much bigger question that could threaten India's federalism, that could create a big disadvantage for several states, especially the southern states. So that is why the editorial appreciates the role of the opposition in defeating this controversial bill. And it praises the constitution makers who introduced a provision of two-thirds majority for such constitutional amendments under Article 368. And there are specific constitutional amendments that even require ratification by 50% of the states before it can be signed by the president, before the presidential assent can be granted. Now, this system acts as a checks and balance to prevent a majority government from bulldozing its majoritarian will in the parliament. Now, can you find out for which specific constitutional amendments two-thirds majority is required? Can you please mention that in the comments? One hint is that any constitutional amendment impacting the federal structure, or let's say independence of judiciary, for example. And can you specifically find out the instances where the ratification by 50% of the states is necessary? So please mention that in the comments below. Under what specific circumstances or which constitutional amendments require a two-third majority, and which of them specifically require ratification by 50% of the states? So can you cite the particular examples for that in the comments below? Now moving on, please take up this mains practice question based on what we have discussed and try to practice your answer writing. The question is asking the controversy, the challenges related to the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill. Now, the next article on page number 8, a column, it's related to the same issue, but it's focused just on women's reservation. This article will help you understand why women's reservation is needed immediately. The country can't wait anymore. The government should find a way out. See, if the government was really serious about implementing women's reservation, at least from 2029 Lok Sabha elections, there was nothing that was stopping the government. It could have implemented this, as I told you, even without altering the number of seats in Lok Sabha and the seats assigned to the states. It can be implemented with the existing numbers. It can be done. But why is there no political will for that? Instead, why is the government trying to link this with the broader issue of delimitation and the allocation of seats in the Lok Sabha? Right? So the writer is presenting a very strong case to highlight why women's reservation is absolutely necessary for a country like India. See, India stands out as a vibrant democracy. Our voter turnout has been increasing, and it's largely recognized as a free and fair election that the country witnesses, be it at the national level or at the state level. India uh, is able to thrive and establish itself as a functional democracy. But a democracy is never complete if you're leaving out half of your population. 50% nearly of a population are women. But look at the political representation they have. If you look at state legislatures, the average is just around 9%. There are just 9% women MLAs across state legislative assemblies. So just imagine the extent of male domination in state assemblies. And it's no different with the parliament. In the parliament, it's just slightly better at 14 to 15% women MPs. These numbers are extremely poor numbers for a country of the size of India, with nearly half of our population made up of women. Right? This highlights the gross inequality, the gender-based discrimination that exists. 9% women MLAs in state assemblies, 14 to 15% women MPs in the parliament. This data alone makes a very strong case, a very strong argument as to why 33% reservation is necessary and it has to be implemented immediately in state assemblies and in the Lok Sabha. Now, India took a very bold step in the 1990s through the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that provided for Panchayati Raj institutions and municipal bodies, where women's reservation has already been implemented. In local bodies, it's not just one-third seats that have been reserved. Many states have pushed this to 50% reservation for women candidates. And this representation provided for women in local politics, it has had a very, very big positive impact. Of course, there are few drawbacks as well, but cumulatively, the positive impact is something which is very evident in our villages, in our ward level administration that you see. See, one criticism that comes up is how women's reservation is often misused, or it is how subverted by male politicians. The male members of the household, especially politically influential families, they would never like to give up their influence and power. They often end up fielding women candidates from their own family just as a proxy. You might have heard of this term called Sarpanch Pati. Because of 33% to 50% reservation in most local bodies across India, what the male candidates have done, right? Since the constituencies are reserved mandatorily for women, They field women candidates from their own family, their wife, or could be any other female from the family itself. And they just act as a proxy. In many cases, the women panchayat leader would not even be involved in decision making. The decision would still be made by the male politician of the household, usually the husband, leading to the term sarpanch pati. Yes, there are many, many such instances across states in India where women's reservation in local bodies has been subverted, mainly through proxy women candidates. So that is not true or genuine empowerment. But still, don't forget the larger positive impact it has had. Across India, there are several women candidates in local bodies who are asserting themselves, who are playing a role in local governance, in local decision making, from education to healthcare to sanitation. And this has had a very, very big positive impact on many aspects of governance. It could be girl education, it could be the well being of pregnant women and infants, it could be their health and nutrition, or it could be the safety of women. On these issues and matters, local bodies which have had more women candidates, you see much better administrative performance. And that itself is a sign that women's reservation is absolutely necessary. Subversion through proxies can happen in Lok Sabha and state assemblies as well, correct? Because, see, in India, politics is largely a matter of privilege, right? You talk about nepotism in Bollywood, but I don't think there's any other domain in our country where nepotism exists as big as in Indian politics. Without money, power, or influence, or with that political name, it's very, very hard and near impossible for a common man to make it in Indian politics. Some say that let women candidates make it on their own merit. Why are you undermining them by providing reservation? But please understand, in India, politics is not just about competence and merit. It has been a matter of privilege. It has been a matter of influence. So if you have to break that stranglehold that political dynasties have held in the country, then providing affirmative action through reservation is one of the way forward. Now, when you look at political parties, though they claim that they are all in favor of women's reservation and all parties have unanimously backed the Women's Reservation Act in 2023, then how come representation for women in their own parties is minimal? You take any party for that matter, you take national level parties, you take small regional parties, representation for women candidates, especially those who are not from a political dynasty, is very, very minimal. Those who go on to occupy high offices is again largely limited and restricted. Only those who are well connected to the top leadership, only some of them are able to make it through the glass ceiling. So this makes it very clear that we need more and more women candidates. We can't have parties treating women as a vote bank. That's what many parties have done. In fact, in the context of the 131st Constitution Amendment Bill, one of the criticism brought by the opposition against the ruling party is that the ruling party is trying to use this as a vote bank issue, trying to project itself as a messiah for women while trying to indirectly link it with delimitation and sharing of seats for the states, because they know that opposition parties will oppose it and they will get branded as anti-women, but not the ruling party in power. Right? That's one of the allegations against the ruling party. But the point here is no party is better than the other when it comes to representation for women. Within their own parties, women are underrepresented, highly underrepresented. Now, you might say without reservation, they can try to do it voluntarily, that you can encourage the parties to give more tickets to women candidates. But trust me, that will never work. That experiment, that model has never worked. And given the cultural and the social mindset that exists, the patriarchal nature, the orthodox nature of the Indian society, where women are in some households even prohibited from stepping out or taking up a public role, it becomes extremely difficult for women to exercise their political rights. They face systemic discrimination in the society. There are cultural norms, social taboos that work against women. So it's important to break that shackles, the break those shackles that are holding women behind. And a policy such as providing reservation can go a long way in achieving that, especially since India is growing at a rapid pace. It's very critical to ensure that women are adequately represented in policy making at the highest levels. Now you take important ministries like Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, important departments and organs of the government. Most decisions, even those related to education, health, sanitation, they're all taken by old patriarchal male members, with women having very little say in what decisions are taken. And as I told you, our own experience with local bodies shows that when more women are involved in decision making, better decisions are made. There is better efficiency in administration, lesser corruption as well has been noted. And that is exactly what will happen. It will have a cascading effect, what we call as a ripple effect. Now, forget all of this. There might be a lot of other negatives and drawbacks, agree. But look at the intangible effect that women reservation can have. Young girls across the country growing up, seeing more women leaders in the public domain, don't you think that will inspire them, motivate them? It will build that courage in them that they can also step out. They can stand up against patriarchy, come out and take up a public facing role. So look at the intergenerational impact it's going to have. It will create that pipeline for more and more women leaders to come out. Initially, yes, women candidates might just be proxies in many constituencies, mainly for their husbands, right? But down the line, it will have a cascading ripple effect, which we are seeing today in local bodies. The Sarpanchpati model, which was seen in the 90s and early 2000s, right? It's there maybe in some constituencies today as well. But there are many, many women candidates who are today standing on their own. And that is exactly what will happen 30, 40 years down the line. That's what you call the pipeline effect. And this is something you can't discount for. You can't really quantify this. It's an intangible outcome. So as India continues to grow as an economic powerhouse, you can't exclude 50% of your population from policy making and decision making. That is why the writer strongly believes that women's reservation has to be implemented immediately without further delays. Now, if our political parties are serious about this, because opposition parties are shouting that, look, we are not against women's reservation. Don't brand us as anti women. We are just opposing delimitation. Understood. But come out and support the immediate implementation of women's reservation and start acting voluntarily. Increase women's representation in your own parties first, right? And the same applies to the ruling party as well. We are not being biased or favoring any certain party here, right? In the case of India, most parties fall into the same bracket. The ruling party as well has to set an example. If they are genuinely serious about immediately implementing women's reservation, they can do it even without 131st Constitution Amendment Bill. They don't need to increase the seats in Lok Sabha. It's not necessary because that leads to a much bigger issue. With the current number of seats, let them go ahead, who's stopping them, and provide reserved seats for women candidates, right? So this is a true test. Just watch out as to which parties would do what. That is a true test of their commitment to genuinely empower Indian women. Now, based on this topic, take up this practice question. You need to argue why women's reservation is necessary in politics and why it will make Indian democracy resilient, truly representative, and responsive. Clear? Now, let's move on to the next topic. There's an editorial and a set of articles related to the US Iran peace talks and the Israel Lebanon ceasefire that has been announced. A quick update on the Iran war, and then we'll proceed to the remaining articles in the paper. So, as you know, the first round of talks between US and Iran that was mediated by Pakistan has failed. It failed to yield any results because both sides were not able to arrive at a middle ground. But Iran had a precondition, especially if the next round of talks had to continue, if the second round of talks had to be organized, and if Iran had to agree on some of the terms laid by the US, such as ending its nuclear program, handing over its nuclear stockpile, which is a priority for the Trump administration. If Iran has to agree to this, Iran has said that we have a precondition. What is that precondition? That Israel has to commit to stop the war on all the fronts. Israel is accused of using disproportionate force, especially after the 2 week ceasefire was declared between US and Iran. which paved the way for the first round of talks. Immediately after the declaration of the ceasefire, Israel escalated its war in Lebanon, especially in southern Lebanon. As you know, Israel is targeting Hezbollah, a Shia militia, which is a security threat for Israel. But however, in the name of targeting Hezbollah, Israel has committed large scale violence, atrocities in Lebanon, bombing civilian targets, killing hundreds of innocent civilians. So that is where the Israeli military aggression becomes quite unacceptable, not just for Iran, but for any other country as well. Even India opposed the targeting of civilians in Lebanon. So Iran had made this a precondition that US has to pressurize Israel, bring Israel back in line, ensure that Israel doesn't cross the red lines, and stop the fighting on all the fronts, at least for the time being, so that we can focus on the second round of talks and achieve a lasting peace agreement. And Iran did something which was quite unexpected yesterday. It has announced that the Hormuz Strait is now open to all commercial ships. Though there are conflicting reports about whether it's actually implemented or not, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has announced that now Hormuz would be open for all commercial ships, at least for the ceasefire period. As long as the ceasefire will last, Iran is likely to allow vessels to pass through. So this comes as a big relief for global markets, for oil, gas supplies. That's why on Monday you will see the markets zooming across the world. So this sets the stage for more mature talks to take place between US and Iran. It's being reported that Pakistan might again host the second round of talks. And if they reach a final agreement, Trump might personally travel to Islamabad to sign the agreement as well. So now the ball was in US court to use its pressure and influence on Israel to make Israel behave, to ensure that Israel remains committed to the ceasefire. And that is what Trump has done yesterday. He has publicly taken aim at Israel, criticizing Israel's military actions. If you look at Trump's social media post, he said, "Enough is enough." It was a message to Israel and Netanyahu that Israel cannot continue to bombard Lebanon and continue the fighting on other fronts and expect Iran to surrender and agree to their terms. So US has brought in full pressure on Israel, forcing Netanyahu to take a back step. So one should hope that Israel would abide by these red lines, and this would pave the way for the next round of talks, which could hopefully result in a peace deal. What would be the exact terms of that deal? We need to wait and watch. As I said, US is insisting that Iran should hand over its existing nuclear stockpile of enriched uranium. It should give guarantees that it would not seek the development of nuclear weapons. Whether that would happen or not, and how would Iran transition from here, this is something only time would tell. But the Lebanon ceasefire is of great significance because it finally brings the conflict here to an end, at least for now, temporarily. Hormuz is also open for now until the ceasefire will last, and Israel has been reined in by Trump, which has allowed civilians in Lebanon to go back and recollect their lives, which had been completely displaced by the Israeli bombardment. Now, next, coming to page number 13, Indian refiners who have stepped out to buy Iranian oil, they are facing a payment issue. If you remember, a few days ago, the US allowed for temporary sanctions relief, for sanctions to be lifted on Russian oil and as well as on Iranian oil. But this sanctions relief by the US applied only for Russian and Iranian oil that was already stranded at sea. Any Russian and Iranian oil which was already stranded at sea, this could be bought by any country without feeling the impact of American sanctions. So this was done by the US to ease the pressure on global oil prices and oil supplies. Right? By the way, the crisis was triggered by the US itself, right? By targeting Iran along with Israel. But in order to cool down the oil prices, US gave this temporary sanctions relief for a 30-day period, for a 1-month period where refiners from across the world could go and buy Russian and Iranian oil, which is already stuck at sea, that is already loaded onto ships, and stranded at sea because of the impact of the sanctions and the war which had begun. So, from India, refiners like Indian Oil Corporation were very keen to buy Iranian oil because this would address our immediate requirements. And also remember, since 2018 period, we have not bought even a drop of Iranian oil. India zeroed out oil imports from Iran because of Trump's sanctions. In 2018, Trump quit the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, and he brought back crippling sanctions on Iran and forced countries like India to zero out oil imports from Iran. So India fell under that American pressure and the sanctions pressure, and we completely cut off oil imports from Iran. At that point, Iran was one of our top oil suppliers, especially from 2006 to 2014 period. Iran was the second largest oil supplier after Iraq. It had even overtaken Saudi Arabia. So India had to cut oil imports post 2018, 2019. So in the last 7 years, approximately, we have not bought Iranian oil. This is the first time that Indian refiners are moving to buy Iranian oil. But they are facing a payment issue. Though US has given a sanctions relief, right now it is difficult to use dollars and Western banking systems to pay for Iranian oil because there is still a lot of hesitance. There's no clarity as to how exactly this would work. What if tomorrow US goes crazy and again brings sanctions targeting Indian companies which bought Iranian oil? So there's a lot of hesitance amongst refiners to go and buy Iranian oil, but they are eager to do it. That's why they are now using the Chinese currency. They're using the Chinese yuan to settle the payments instead of using dollar based payments. Instead of relying on Western controlled institutions, which may not facilitate the payment, though the sanctions have been lifted, right? Because there's a difference between announcements and what is actually implemented on the ground. Though US has given the relief, it's not sure whether the global banking financial systems would allow these transactions to take place. That's why IOC is going ahead with the Chinese yuan to settle the payments for the Iranian oil we are picking up from ships that are stranded at sea. And it's the first time that we are buying Iranian oil in the last 7 years. Next, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR, has brought out an alarming report on the plight of Rohingya refugees. Now, this topic can be relevant for mains and as well as prelims. The Rohingyas are an ethnic minority found in the Rakhine state of Myanmar. It basically borders Bay of Bengal, and the Rohingyas are an ethnic Muslim minority. Historically, they belonged to the Chittagong Cox's Bazar region, which is in today's Bangladesh. But over a period of time, they had moved towards the Rakhine region and settled in the Rakhine belt. But in Myanmar, since 1960, since the military regime took over, the Tatmadaw established its military rule, and the country came under the rule of the military junta. Since then, Rohingyas have been targeted, persecuted, not just by the army, but in collusion with radical Buddhists. So, this has been a state sponsored ethno religious, ethno communal violence. And in recent years, mass killings have been carried out in 2011, 12, 2016, and 17. In fact, Rohingyas were first declared as stateless. Back in 1960s, Myanmar's military regime took away their citizenship, stating that they are the responsibility of Bangladesh, which was then East Pakistan. And as they lost their citizenship and became stateless, eventually they were subjected to targeted violence and discrimination. And this has triggered one of the biggest refugee crises in our backyard, in our neighborhood. So Rohingya refugees have fled to Chittagong Cox's Bazar region to seek shelter, the region to which they historically belong to. So you have a large Rohingya refugee population in Bangladesh. Thousands of Rohingyas have moved into India seeking asylum. And many Rohingyas also try to enter other countries in the region. Countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, sometimes even as far away as Sri Lanka and Maldives. And they take the risky sea route with the help of human traffickers. In order to get away from Rakhine, and to escape the atrocities and the horrific circumstances that is present in front of them, they often pay these human traffickers who use these small fishing boats to load hundreds of refugees, including small children, and they push them into a risky sea route through the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal. Many such ships, they are not fit to handle such a large uh, people or large crowd, and they end up sinking in Andaman Sea or Bay of Bengal. Hundreds of Rohingyas have lost their lives, they've gone missing. According to the UNHCR report, in 2025 alone, 900 plus Rohingya refugees were killed, which makes it one of the deadliest years for Rohingya sea crossings. So please look at the map here. You'll get an idea as to which countries Rohingyas are trying to flee to. They use the sea route via Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal, either to first reach the Chittagong Cox's Bazar region in Bangladesh, from the Rakhine region in Myanmar, and from here they try to enter Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia to seek asylum in these countries. There are instances where they've tried moving towards Sri Lanka and Maldives as well. And many boats they have sunk, and hundreds of Rohingyas, including small children, have unfortunately lost their lives over the years. So this brings the UNHCR into news as well. What is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees? The UNHCR was formed in 1950 primarily to provide relief to refugees post Second World War. Especially across Europe, there was a massive refugee situation. So to accommodate them, to provide them basic necessities like shelter, food, medicine, water, the UNHCR became a relief organization. It functions as a UN agency, as one of the programs of the UN, mandated to aid and protect refugees across the world, help any displaced communities. In New Delhi as well, there is a UNHCR office where refugees in India can seek support from the United Nations. If refugees, let's say they have entered India seeking asylum and India is not ready to grant asylum, they can still reach the UNHCR office asking for basic rights to be granted and protected. So it's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. So please note down these basic details. Now, coming to the next topic, again from Myanmar. Myanmar has seen a big political change. Recently, the country witnessed elections after years of civil war. And as expected, the USDP party, which is largely controlled by Myanmar's army itself, has won the election, and the army chief, Min Aung Hlaing, he has declared himself as the president of the country. Myanmar's army chief, the one who declared the emergency in 2021, brought back military rule, and he toppled the then civilian government. He has basically appointed himself as the president after this fraudulent election that was carried out. The USDP, the Union Solidarity Democratic Party, it's entirely dominated by the military itself, right? And they have claimed to have won the election. So no one believes that this was a genuine, legitimate, free and fair election. So Myanmar's army chief is now elevating himself to be the president of the country. And as part of the political transition, he has issued pardons to several political prisoners. This shows that there might be some sense of stability coming back. The new government and the new leadership, they are looking to mend the ties with the rebel forces and the opposition groups and the pro-democracy forces. So the former president of Myanmar, Win Myint, who had been arrested following the 2021 military coup, he has been pardoned and he has been released from custody. And Myanmar's most popular leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who has fought for democratic rights in Myanmar since 1980s through her party, the National League for Democracy. Even she had been jailed and she had been sentenced to a very long jail term. Her sentence has been reduced. She has not been entirely pardoned, but her sentence has been reduced. And apart from that, close to 4,000 plus prisoners who were facing years of jail or even the death punishment, many of them have been pardoned. And this shows that there is a new rapprochement happening from the government, the new government which is being put in place. It may not be a genuinely democratically elected government, but it points towards some sense of stability coming back. But however, it's not going to be so easy for the USDP government and the Myanmar army to bring back normalcy, because the rebel groups, they hold vast extent of territory in Myanmar. There are multiple ethnic armed organizations, from the Arakan army to the Kachin Independence Army, which have taken over large parts of the country. There are pro democracy forces, right? So these rebel groups have largely taken control of key border areas and key locations, and nearly half of the country is not even under Myanmar's army's control. So these challenges will continue to remain. The conflict with the establishment and the rebel forces will continue. But the new government is showing signs of a political reach out. And probably it's trying to pave the path for talks through which it can try to end the civil war and bring back some normalcy to Myanmar. Next, another key development. Just make a quick note of this. We don't have to go into all the details, not required. The IMF and World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions, they have restored relations with Venezuela, which means now Venezuela can have access to funding and loans from the IMF and the World Bank. So, what does this tell you? This tells you how IMF and World Bank are largely Western controlled institutions, which only serves the corporate interests and the capitalist interests of the Western powers. See, as long as Nicolas Maduro was in power, IMF and World Bank had cut off their ties with Venezuela, and they were not providing any funds and loans to the country, which was a result of the geopolitical tensions between the West and Venezuela. Once Maduro was taken out, and Trump has basically installed a pro US government, which is willing to allow American companies to access Venezuelan oil and resources. Immediately, IMF, World Bank are coming in to set up and restore ties with Venezuela, which means US companies are the ones who will benefit from this. It's not going to be the people of Venezuela, right? With a pro US government in place and the leadership committing that Venezuela's resources are now open for American companies, they will draw the finances from the international markets, channel it towards the exploitation of Venezuela's resources, which would profit the American corporates, which would suit the capitalist agenda of the Trump administration. That again highlights the skewed nature of these Western controlled financial institutions. Developing countries from global south, such as India, have always had concern about IMF and World Bank, that they often favor the Western countries. The World Bank is largely controlled by the US. The IMF is dominated by European Union, primarily serving Western economic interests. So this becomes very evident when you look at the chain of events that has happened with Venezuela. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's quickly wrap up the class for today. On the front page, the Hindu has published this image from a farm in Punjab, where you can see a farmer using a harvester to harvest the wheat crop, right? But the topic that's relevant for our exams is that the harvest has been slightly delayed because of unseasonal, unexpected rains, which is a result of Western disturbances. If you're from the Delhi NCR region, the Punjab Haryana belt, you might have seen how in the last few days temperature has become slightly tolerable and moderate, and you have seen some sporadic rain with cooler temperatures. So this phenomena is a result of Western disturbances, a very rare and unique phenomena. So Western disturbances are essentially a non-monsoonal extratropical low pressure system that originates in the Mediterranean Sea. From here, it picks up moisture and moves towards east direction through the jet streams available over here, passing across West Asia, Central Asia region, traversing through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, Pakistan, reaching the northern, northwestern parts of India. And it's very critical for these parts of India as it is responsible for Himalayan snowfall and nourishing the rabi crops by bringing in much needed rain. It also acts as a moderating effect on the pollution levels and the higher temperatures that might be seen here. It's often seen during the December-February period. It could also be seen in the post-March or April-May period as well. So please note down these basic details about western disturbances and the states which receive them. Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, even Jammu and Kashmir up to Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. You can even add Rajasthan as well. In some cases, rare cases, dust storms are triggered up in Rajasthan because of western disturbances. Next, a topic related to environment and ecology. In Meghalaya, a very luxury resort was proposed. The Taj Hotel Group was supposed to set up this luxury resort on an island. The island is called Lumpongdeng, which is located in a man made lake, the Umiam Lake. This is a man made reservoir formed by the hydroelectric dam built across the Umiam River. It's located on the outskirts of Shillong, the capital of Meghalaya, roughly like 20 kilometers from Shillong. So, this dam across the Umiam River created this spectacular lake that you see in the image, the Umiam Lake. And you have these land formations in between, which the state government was willing to lease out to Tata Group and the Taj hotel chain to set up a luxury resort over here at Lumpongdeng Island. But local groups, environmentalists, have raised serious concerns about the viability of the project, about its ecological impact. So, following the strong opposition, the state government is reconsidering this proposed project. It was expected to boost tourism, but this issue highlights the conflict between promoting growth and conserving your environment. So please just be aware of the locations, the name of the island, the man made lake, and the river. Just be familiar with this. You never know, there can be a prelims question related to it. Now, the last topic for today, the Supreme Court has given a very strong warning to the state governments of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh because they are not cracking down on the sand mining mafia, which is very, very rampant in the Chambal basin, especially in the Chambal Gharial sanctuary, which is a critical habitat. The Chambal Gharial wildlife sanctuary faces a direct threat because of rampant mining mafia, especially sand mining mafia, that's prevalent across all the three states. Right? The Chambal Gharial Wildlife Sanctuary, which is located around the Chambal River, you can see here in the map, right? This protected area spans across these three states, and it's a critical habitat for the Gharial, which is a critically endangered member of the crocodile family. And it is also home to the Gangetic dolphins, the river dolphins, along with other important species. But the Gharial is listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. So, rampant sand mining in the Chambal River Basin directly threatens the ecosystem and the habitat of the Gharial crocodiles. That's why the Supreme Court has taken the state governments to task. It has even threatened that if they don't crack down on illegal sand mining mafia, Supreme Court might even order the deployment of paramilitary forces. So this brings the Chambal Gharial sanctuary into news, and you can even understand some basic details about the Gharial and the Gangetic River dolphin. So on this note, I bring the analysis to an end. I hope it was a useful session. Do let me know how it went in the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.